Hello and welcome to Bags of Action. My name is Pete, and this is a 5-minute Bags of Action review of Hawk the Slayer from back in 1980. Now, this fantasy adventure film is one I was really a big fan of when I was a child. I grew up in the English countryside, so films like this and TV shows like Robin of Sherwood were great imagination fodder when you're living somewhere surrounded by woodland. So if I was, one day I might be being Robin Hood, the next day I might be being Hawk the Slayer. So I have fond memories of this film. But again, it's a bit like other things from that time period. I haven't actually seen it since then, so I wondered if the film in my head was as good as the film that I ordered on Blu-ray. So what's the premise of this movie? With the aid of his companions, a man seeks to defeat his evil brother who has taken a nun hostage. That is very much a simplification of the story, but it is kind of what happens. This was directed by Terry Marcel, who went on to do Jane and the Lost City, and a film I'd not heard of before, but very similar, called Prisoners of the Lost Universe, and also did lots of TV, including 7 episodes of The New Adventures of Robin Hood, which makes sense having done this kind of material. It was written by Marcel and also by Harry Robertson, who co-wrote Jane and the Lost City and Prisoners of the Lost Universe with Marcel, and also did all of the soundtracks. And prior to that, he did soundtracks for loads of Hammer horror movies too. The film stars Jack Palance as Voltan, the villain of the piece. He was also, of course, in Batman, Cyborg 2, City Slickers, Tango and Cash, and very famously the villain in the movie Shane. John Terry stars as Hawk. He went on to be in the TV series Lost, 24. He was also in the film Zodiac and was a real newcomer here, although the filmmakers compared him and his movement to a young Errol Flynn. Bernard Bresslaw is in this movie as a giant. I remember him very well from all the Carry On films, but he's also been in things like Krull, Jabberwocky and The Fifth Musketeer, so similar kind of fare to this. Ray Charlson is Crow the Elf. He's also was in Prisoners of the Lost Universe, so again reuniting with Terry Marcel, and was in the films Empire of the Sun and United 93. Peter O'Farrell plays the dwarf in this movie, and he's also been in Legend and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. William Morgan Sheppard is in this film. He's been in loads of things: The Librarians, Dexter, Doctor Who, Quantum Leap, some Star Trek The Next Generation, the movie Transformers, and also he's been in different Star Trek movies, the new reboot ones and the original ones, and he's played both a Vulcan and a Klingon, which is pretty impressive. Patricia Quinn is also in this movie. She's been in Doctor Who, and one of the most recent movies she's been in is Tamara Drew. And Annette Crosbie, a British TV stalwart, famous for One Foot in the Grave, recently appeared in Afterlife with Ricky Gervais, and she's also been in Into the Woods, and another person who, like many, has been in Doctor Who. A whole host of other faces from British TV make small appearances in this movie. People like Roy Kinnear, Patrick McGee and Warren Clarke. And you also get a little viewing of Derek O'Connor, who went on to be in Robin of Sherwood and was also in Lethal Weapon 2. And he's one of those kind of character actors you see in lots of Hollywood movies. The soundtrack to Hawk the Slayer is something I remembered really well. It's reminiscent of almost War of the Worlds meets Ennio Morricone, which makes sense when the makers of this movie were looking to move. They saw that Star Trek and Star Wars were doing really well, and they thought fantasy would be the next thing, and they were looking to do kind of a spaghetti western fantasy in England, which was a reason, I think, to cast Jack Palance. And again, the music has got the shadows of that Morricone kind of vibe. The Hawk the Slayer came out in the same year as Flash Gordon, incidentally the first movie I saw at the cinema, and it shares a similar kind of campy vibe with that movie. Now, I've always loved films where a team is assembled to go on an adventure, and particularly ones where there's a killer soundtrack, and I do think this film, along with Flash Gordon, has played a key part in that for me. So, what was Hawk the Slayer actually like this time around? Watching it with a modern eye, it certainly isn't perfect, but then again, if I went and played Gauntlet in the arcade now, I doubt I'd feel as good as I did in childhood. There's a lot more sitting and waiting in this movie than I remembered, and I'd forgotten that Hawke already knew 3 of his recruits, the elf, the dwarf, and the giant. So in some ways, this feels more like a sequel, or the fantasy equivalent of the Avengers, if you imagine that film being made without any of the solo movies Marvel did beforehand. Palance and Terry are a bit over the top, in different ways really. Palance kind of really chews the scenery, and Terry does this kind of stoic, almost silent thing, and they both feel, I get the contrast there, but they both feel a little bit overplayed to a modern ear and eye. I can only imagine Americans were cast to broaden the overall appeal of the movie. Bresslaw and O'Farrell's interplay is really good and very funny, which makes sense. Charleston as Crow has a brilliant otherworldly vibe to him. For me, the best performance by quite a way is William Morgan Sheppard. He plays it the most straight and is kind of, really the backbone of the film in some ways, as the guy who loses a hand at the start of the film. Now, the fight scenes. Now, sometimes they feel a bit like vignettes. They often happen away, but the fight scenes and the magical elements are still the best things about this film today. And I know from watching the special features that the samurai fighting style was used, which makes the fights feel different from other similar films and similar TV series. Now, all the ingredients are in Hawk the Slayer to make a great action film. They're all here. There's family links, having his father murdered and his wife murdered. There's a team of warriors assembling. But at times, I was kind of wishing the film had a more obvious through line, with the main characters driving the action more, because they do rely on woman and her magic to get them through a lot of situations. Watching the special features, the actress who played her, Patricia Quinn, did say, well, Hawk can't do very much without me. And you think, well, if he's the hero of the film, it's called Hawk the Slayer, then you'd expect him to do more. And so there are ways, I think, watching it again, this could have been rewritten or edited differently that could make a huge difference. But it's still a great film. I mean, the memory of this film is probably better than watching it now, but you've got great visuals, the central premise is strong, the overall vibe is really interesting, the Hawk graphic that flies towards you and the music still go a long way to making it enjoyable, and the fights and the sword play, as I say, even more so. I do actually think Hawk and Voltan cosplay needs to be more of a thing, but anyway. So all in all, by modern standards, this feels a bit more like an episode of a TV series than a fully fleshed out movie. If only the planned sequels had been made, because it ends in such a way that you do expect it to go on to be a fully fledged franchise. And I can see why I love this movie so much as a kid, and it's why it's so important to me. But it does also make me appreciate Star Wars more when you think how much of a revelation that movie was for genre filmmaking, because this and Flash Gordon were made the same year as Empire Strikes Back. But there's a difference there. Again, less camp, more kind of substance to it. So I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult one. If you asked me before I rewatched it, Hawk the Slayer I'd say is one of my favourite films of all time. I don't think it's that anymore, but it's still an important film in my kind of growing up and development as kind of a film viewer. But it's still really good. It's maybe just not quite as good as I thought. So with all that considered, I'm going to give Hawk the Slayer a nostalgic 3 bags of action out of 5. Have you seen Hawk the Slayer? Do you agree with my assessment of it? Feel free to comment below or get in touch with us via email, Facebook or on Twitter. We have new episodes coming out weekly alongside our full-length podcast, which is usually me and my co-host. Don't forget to give us a like and to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell to keep getting notifications. These bags of action will always be free, but if you did want to give a donation to thank us for what we do, then go to our Ko-fi page or coffee page and donate there.